I've been seeing a lot lately that the fitness world has been missing some pieces. Like as a personal trainer, I feel like there's only so much I can do, and there's only so much that your primary care doctor can do. There's things that we have going on in our bodies that we don't have the answers for, and sometimes one or two or even three specialists don't have the answer for. So that's why I've got my good friend Olivia Hensal on today. She specializes in functional medicine, if I have that correct. Do I have that?
Functional nutrition, we'll say.
Functional nutrition, which is a
Similar.
growing area of the health and wellness world. And I'm going to let her expand a little bit on it because she can say all of this stuff way better than me. And today's newsletter is going to be more of a podcast form where I'm going to quiz her on some things, or I should say, ask her things about things that I don't know a whole lot about. And hopefully you guys will learn a lot too. So, Olivia, take the floor.
Yes, thank you, Fran. I appreciate that. Yeah, so my name is Olivia. I'm a functional nutritionist. I'm based in Miami, Florida, although my practice is completely virtual. And a lot of people are very unfamiliar about what functional nutrition is. I know functional medicine is like a larger known term, but functional nutrition is very, very similar in the sense that we practice like root cause medicine. So if somebody comes into my practice, and this is very common across the board when it comes to functional nutrition, functional medicine. We see a lot of people typically who are just struggling with a lot of like chronic symptoms that conventional doctors just simply can't seem to figure out. And so again, I like to think of it as like more so like root cause medicine. So I use a lot of like advanced diagnostic tests, like stool tests, like the GI map, or like urine tests to assess hormone analysis, or like blood work. We do all the comprehensive blood work looking at nutrients. I can do organic acid tests, mold tests. I mean, there's a lot of testing that we can do, again, just to sort of like uncover the root cause of why somebody might be experiencing a symptom. So the most common things that I see in my practice, a lot of them have to do with like gut health. So like chronic bloating. I mean, yeah, so many people I think in this world are struggling with, well, in this country especially, are struggling with chronic gut issues. So again, bloating. I see a lot of like, general just like stomach pain, stomach discomfort. Yeah, like, irregularities with bowel movements. I also see a lot of women who struggle with hormonal imbalances. So like PCOS, endometriosis, acne is a big thing, dysmenorrhea, which is just like having irregular periods. So your periods aren't coming every single month.
Right.
Really bad PMS symptoms like anxiety, bloating, insomnia, mood swings, irritability. A lot of that is really, really common. I see a lot of people too with like metabolic dysfunction. So people who are struggling with like losing weight, or, they have high cholesterol, high triglycerides, insulin resistance. So again, we're not necessarily like covering up these symptoms with medication. We're digging a little bit deeper. So we're doing the stool testing, we're doing the hormone testing, looking at hormones in the saliva, in the blood, in the urine, and also doing like full comprehensive blood work too, to assess nutrient status. And basically, like filling in the blanks, or filling in any imbalances that we see with like nutrition, personalized supplement support, and lifestyle support as well.
So that there's a lot of stuff you just covered there, and I feel like we can entire podcast talking about where all that comes from. What I'll break it down question by question though. What do you think, or what would you estimate is your average like patient demographic, age, background? Where do they come from? Like, what's their history? Even down to like how many doctors had they seen before they
Mm,
found you?
yeah, yeah, that's a good question. The answer is it really varies. I
Yeah.
mean, I see women and men like that are would be considered like geriatric, maybe in their 70s or 80s. I see a lot of like young men and women too, right out of college. I don't work with kids younger than 18, but I would say the majority of my client demographic falls like anywhere between like 25 to 40, and mostly women.
Oh wow. Okay. And what is your, I mean, we you just listed off a ton of symptoms that you are working with. What is the most common of those symptoms? Is it usually the gut
Yeah.
stuff? Does it happen to be like hormonal stuff? Or I mean, I know
Mhm.
those things are intertwined, but
Yeah. For sure. Honestly, I would say it's a mix. I see probably about 50% like gut dysregulation, chronic gut symptoms, and then the other 50% is hormonal imbalances. I see a lot of women that are like 28, 29, 30 that are coming off of hormonal birth control, and they have been on the pill since they were 16, and now they're trying to transition off and like naturally balance their hormones. But
Right.
there's also, I would say within that group, there's 30 to 40% of these women that experience both, gut issues and hormonal imbalances because the two definitely go hand in hand.
Right. Yeah.
What is going on in our gut and our microbiome can definitely influence our endocrine system. So a lot of people do experience symptoms in both like in both systems.
So I'm going to ask kind of the can of worms question here. And you already mentioned one of the things that I've personally seen, and I've talked about in a previous newsletter, which we'll get back to in a second. But what would you say if you had to list, we'll say five of them because there's probably more, but what are the top five causes for these particular issues, in your opinion, that you think lead people,
Yeah.
you and your practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's very specific and I would say like personal, but I know I listed off a lot of symptoms. Is there any in particular that you're curious about, or would you just say like high level? What are the biggest things that contribute to dysfunction?
Yeah, I would say go high level with it. Like your comment about the birth control and the hormonal issues really hit home for me because my wife just had a
Mhm.
whole thing with that, which I
Yeah,
said I'll tell you about in a second. But
yeah,
um,
so common.
birth control is such a big one. I feel like that has
Hmm.
such a variety of downstream issues. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I know the highest level, easiest answer is to say like, oh, the current American diet, but like I think
Hmm.
maybe you could also break down what facets of like
Hmm.
diet might contribute to it. But maybe there's also other things that we're doing. Like, is it,
Yeah.
some people will go as far as to say like blue light screens can cause like,
Hmm.
are there any of those kind of fringe, and fringe sounds like a negative connotation to it, but like I
Hmm.
think they're important in that, like even if they are fringe, I think they're important if we don't
Yeah,
look
for
into
sure.
that. And I should say maybe you more specifically might be like the first one to some of these issues. So what are some of those things at the highest level you can wage that might be causing some of these dysfunctions?
Yeah. I love this question because my answer is probably going to surprise a lot of people, and I think it's even greater, even bigger than like the standard American diet. I think a lot of it, and this is like a whole entire like issue with our system in this country, but I think a lot of it has to do with the chemicals and toxins in our food and in our environment overall. I have so many clients that go to Europe, for example, and they eat tons of bread, tons of pasta, tons of dairy and cheese, and they feel amazing. And then they come back to the US, and it's like almost immediately when the plane touches down, they're like, I feel like shit. But no, I mean, I'm being a bit dramatic, but more specifically, when they eat gluten and dairy here, they feel really, really bad. And, a lot of it has to do with just the food supply and the pesticides, the glyphosate, the insecticides. And this isn't to be an alarmist, but it's very true. There's so many chemicals in our food supply that can contribute to like dysfunction on the very basic cellular level in our system. And not only in our food supply, but also in our water supply, in our personal care products, candles, cleaning products, makeup, shampoos, lotions. I mean, a lot of these products have chemicals in them that can disrupt our endocrine system, can cause like mitochondrial dysfunction. So there's a lot of that people don't think about that can make a huge difference or, really contribute negatively to health outcomes.
Glyphosate is one that I've heard a lot of, particularly because I have a lot of friends. I'm just a little bit more trending toward like the anti-alcohol in general, but
Yeah.
I have a lot of
Hmm.
friends who are big beer drinkers, and I saw like the amount of glyphosate content in some of like the big beer brands. I'm like, you guys might want to stop drinking the Coors Light because like it doesn't, I like the numbers kind of scared me. But I
Yeah.
see some of these longer chemical names popping up a little bit more. Are there other like, and don't worry how hard they are to pronounce.
Hmm.
Try and list them off if you can. Are there other chemicals that kind of come to mind? I know fluoride and food dyes are part of this administration, like
Mm-hmm.
big push toward better health.
Hmm.
I'm even curious to your thoughts on forever chemicals and things like clothing and plastics. Like, what are your
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a big thing now too. Yeah, they're coming out and saying that like chemicals in like underwear even can impact like fertility health in men and in women. I haven't really like in full transparency, I haven't looked at that research, but I know like it's there.
yeah,
I'll let this serve as a reminder to to look into that, but it's definitely like I've seen it here and there, but I haven't really dived too deep into it.
yeah,
But in terms of chemicals, like specific chemicals, I mean, I'm really focused, obviously, not only on like food, but because of my brand, Olea Herbals, like one of our big missions is to help people live healthier lives through the use of non-toxic products. So I like have a specific focus on like body care, personal care products that we're using like on our face, on our skin.
right.
So I have more knowledge in that area. And I would say, yeah, I mean, there's tons of things like fragrance is really bad. There's like parabens, phthalates, these compounds that are typically used as like preservatives
Those
can
sound
actually
familiar.
have really, yeah, negative impacts on our endocrine system in particular. Um, there's a term, I don't know if you've ever heard it, it's called xenoestrogens. A lot of these are like found in water as well. Like if you think about BPA, like what's found in plastic or even BPA analogs. So like compounds that are similar to BPA, like BPS and BPP. And these compounds can actually bind to endocrine receptors in our body and mimic or I'm sorry, not endocrine. They can bind to estrogen, bind to
Yeah.
estrogen receptors and mimic estrogen in our body. And there's so many different like chronic hormonal imbalancing like conditions like PCOS, I had mentioned endometriosis, even certain kinds of breast cancer. These are like estrogen dominant conditions. And so they're caused more or less by like a buildup of estrogen in our system. And then there's also the whole thing like our bodies, you know, our body is supposed to be able to naturally detox estrogen, but there's a lot of things that can get in the way of that. But of course, we're in trouble when, you know, we're constantly exposing ourselves to chemicals that are like mimicking estrogen in our system, and causing this like buildup of estrogen. And so, yeah, I mean, the biggest things I would look out for in personal care products are like parabens, phthalates, um,
Any advice?
fragrance.
Any advice on skincare products specifically? My wife wants me to take better care of my face, and so she doesn't let me use any of her products. So I'm trying to find some good stuff
Oh
for
yeah.
her. What what ingredients
Love
should I
that.
avoid in like facial care stuff, moisturizers, things
Mm,
like that?
yeah, yeah,
Why?
yeah. Yeah. I would more so focus on, well, I mean, obviously, yes, you want to focus on what to avoid in like skincare, facial care products, but I would really focus on like what to add in or what to, you want to make sure that you have like specific products in your, like specific ingredients rather in your skincare products. So I would make sure you're like sourcing any products from like a brand that you know, markets themselves as being clean. You know, they use like low tox preservatives. It's also really, really helpful. And this is something I coach my clients on all the time is like reading ingredient lists, not only again in food, but also personal care products. And you have to remember too that the ingredients, and this is a federal law, they have to be stated in order of like weight. So whatever you see, the first couple of ingredients listed, that's what the product has the most of. So if you're seeing like paraben or any compound, any long word that has like the ending of it has paraben in it, that's not a product you want.
Yeah.
So I would source again skincare products from brands that are mostly using like botanicals and clean products like or clean preservatives rather like phenoxyethanol is a preservative. It's obviously you don't want to use a product that has a ton of that in it, but even just like less than 1% can be helpful for preventing any like mold or fungus overgrowth in the actual product, but it's not like technically really toxic for your skin or your system. Um, so yeah.
I want to go back to your clients because you said, of all the issues you've seen, you listed off a bunch. And I'll segue that with a story about my wife, which my newsletter subscribers will know. She was on a Kylina IUD for 5 years. That threw off her progesterone like crazy,
Yeah.
led to some acne. So her dermatologist put her on spironolactone, and that
Yeah.
was supposed to help her acne. You're laughing because I'm sure you've heard this before. Now, here's the thing: her dermatologist kept her on spironolactone for 5 years, and you're only supposed to
That's
stay on that
crazy.
medication according. This is again why I want to loop back to what you do in your practice, because she went to two or three doctors before this one cardiologist noticed the spironolactone and said, "This is something we give to our
Mm.
hypertensive patients who are at risk of
Hmm.
a cardiac event, and they don't
Yeah.
stay on for longer than 6 months."
To
So
be on that for 5 years is crazy.
yeah, and so her cardiologist was impressed, but also scared that she had been on it that long, because he's like, "It's actually a miracle you haven't passed out during a half marathon or something."
My
Uh,
God.
and it wasn't until she started having like these kind of like low blood pressure kind of pass out events a couple months
Mm.
ago that we realized, okay, she's got to get off spironolactone, and now she's getting her IUD taken out as well.
Good.
But yeah, it's just been a long journey. So I
Mhm.
say all that to ask you, what's kind of the craziest? Maybe you can name a couple of them. Maybe if we can squeeze it into a 5 minute stint here. What are some of the most interesting, well, not say craziest, most interesting paths to regulating homeostasis that you see in your practice?
Mhm.
Stuff, one or two, or just maybe give some
Mhm.
reviews of the paths that you've taken to get back to where
Mhm.
people need to be normal again.
Yeah. With hormones or just in general? Because there's so many different paths and so many different
Yeah.
things. And
You know what? Let's keep it in your area of focus with, like, let's say with nutrition, maybe.
okay. Yeah. One of my favorite things to recommend that's very simple, but can be really helpful to get people back to, yeah, homeostasis in a lot of different ways with their gut, with their hormones, with their metabolism. And that's adding, this is so simple, but adding more fiber. Adding more like fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, leafy greens. Dark leafy greens are actually some of the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. So
Right.
adding more leafy greens can be really helpful. And again, this is a very general recommendation because if somebody has gut issues, they're suffering from like dysbiosis or a lot of bloating or chronic discomfort, in their gut or in their stomach, like adding fiber isn't necessarily going to be good for them. So I would say again, this is like a generalized recommendation, but high level, yeah, like adding more vegetables, adding more fruits. These foods are extremely rich in like antioxidants and minerals and vitamins and just all the nutrients, and fiber again at a high level can be really really good for the gut, can be really good for hormones. So that would be one thing I would say to work on.
Would you call yourself more of a purist when it comes to adding in certain micro or macronutrients? Would you prefer that it be from the whole foods versus a supplement, or does it matter?
When it comes to fiber, definitely whole foods.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think like with macronutrients in particular, and most micronutrients too, of course, we want to take a food-based approach. We use supplements, and supplements are really, really important, mostly because like the reality of the situation of the food supply in this country is that it's not as nutrient dense as it once was, and a lot of that has to do with like the depletion of nutrients in the soil, and a lot of that is coming from like excess pesticide use. So it's a whole thing, but I would say, yeah, overall, we definitely want to focus on when it comes to getting in micro and macro nutrients, we want to focus on whole foods and like diet first before we work on adding in supplements.
So if adding fiber, let's say, has been a very transformative thing that you've implemented for your clients, what's one thing you've subtracted from some of your clients
Mm-hmm.
that's made like a really big impact, whether it's a macronutrient or maybe a specific food?
Mm-hmm.
What would that be?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard to say again because every client is so different and every client is experiencing, different things and has different, unique
Needs.
their own like unique physiology, which we are able to see with testing. But I mean, again, high level sugar,
Sugar.
especially like sugary drinks. A lot of people are drinking like sweet tea or soda, alcohol as well. A lot of people don't realize they're getting a lot of sugar from like their alcoholic drinks on the weekend, wine. These things can have such a negative impact on the gut, on hormones, blood sugar balance, metabolism. So we definitely want to keep sugar to a minimum.
What would you say, what are some steps beyond reading nutrition labels that somebody could take to fix their relationship with their food and thus hopefully maybe regulate their homeostasis a little bit better? I know we kind of talked about just being more conscious about ingredients, but are
Mhm,
there other things somebody might do to assess obviously I think the message is getting out there that ultra processed food is not good for us and
mhm,
there's an addictive quality to it. But are
mhm,
there other steps that somebody might take? And maybe that's adding another thing in aside from just fiber that might be able to help kind of regulate some of these things that are really out of whack for us, appetites, hormonal balances, and things like
mhm,
any of the
mhm.
little micro steps you might take.
Yeah, yeah. The first thing that came to mind for me when you were asking this question is just the practice of mindful eating.
Mm,
Something that's so often overlooked. Many people are like oftentimes working from their desk, or they're watching TV, or they're scrolling on their phone, or they're, just distracted in one way or another while they're eating, which can actually be really destructive for gut health.
mm,
And that's because we can really only digest our food when we're in what's called the parasympathetic state. So we have two parts of our autonomic nervous system. We have the sympathetic state, and then there's the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that like rest and digest. And on the contrary, the sympathetic state is like the fight or flight. And both are very, very important. But again, we can really only digest our foods when we're in the parasympathetic state. And so, again, if we're eating while we're distracted, we're not necessarily in tune with like our immediate environment or our body, that can have a negative, like, sort of downstream impact on digestion and on gut health. And we know gut health impacts every other system in our body. So, yeah, one simple thing that people could do is maybe take a couple deep breaths before they start eating, as a way to really help like engage their vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is really, really important for parasympathetic activation and plays a really big role in digestion as well. Making sure to just chew slowly and chew thoroughly. A lot of people are like,
Scarfing
swallowing
down.
their food whole, which is definitely not good. You want to make sure you're chewing each bite until it's like applesauce-like consistency, putting your utensils down in between each bite. All of these things, as simple as they seem, can make a huge, huge difference with digestion and with, therefore, everything else.
I want to have, we have about 5 minutes left, by the way. I want to have this conversation hopefully yield some interest in what you do, and hopefully more people
Mhm,
kind of learn a little bit more about you from this. But
mhm,
from a semi-clinical lens, let's say somebody listens to this and they want to start being a little bit more focused on their next doctor's visit. What are, from the blood panels you might take at a doctor's office, what
mhm,
are some like basic readings? What are the things that maybe most people aren't looking at that they should be?
mhm,
It could be ApoB or, you know,
mhm.
any of these focal points. What is something somebody might look at a little bit deeper that maybe they weren't considering before?
Yeah, yeah. I love this question too. I actually just posted about this on my Instagram, like on my stories. When it comes to blood work at
Yeah.
like the primary care doctor, they are, and this isn't to completely shade like conventional medicine and primary care doctors, but the truth is most of them aren't doing like the deeper dives into blood work and like that whole analysis. So I would say some common markers that should be looked at that often aren't are like when it comes to the thyroid, most doctors are only looking at TSH to assess thyroid function, when in reality, like we could have elevated antibodies, which means that we still have thyroid inflammation, even if the TSH is within normal range. Another big one would be ferritin, which is a marker of iron storage. So most doctors are really only looking at iron or like the actual serum iron versus your iron stores. And if your serum iron levels are normal, but your stores are low, that's another indication that your body still needs iron, because your body is going to pull from the iron stores first, before it pulls from the actual serum from the blood. Um, I would say when it comes to hormones, the timing more so is important than like what's actually being collected. I mean, if you go to the gynecologist, a lot of them are doing progesterone and estrogen, they're getting the full picture, but a lot of them aren't necessarily looking at these levels during like your luteal phase. I typically tend to recommend my women get their hormones tested between days 19 through 22 of their cycle because we want to see how your progesterone is and your estrogen like post ovulation during that luteal phase. I would say those are the three biggest things.
Yeah. That's super helpful. I think you're right, that I don't want to downplay traditional medicine because I get the other side of it is, it's kind of in it's kind of in a doctor's office best interest to request that somebody ask for a more robust test because, they'll get
Mhm.
a little bit more money if we ask for a comprehensive panel versus not. So,
Mhm.
I get
Yeah.
that side of things, but I think depending on the test, I think there are ways that, correct me if I'm wrong, are of little to no cost. If you ask, hey, can I get a reading of my ferritin? And maybe they'll just provide that as an extra reading.
Mhm.
Because I would say most panels, if they collect enough, a large enough sample can read that, right? So,
Mhm. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, yeah.
so I think that's super important. Yeah, I did hear a lot about ferritin recently. Iron is I think one of those micronutrients that maybe flies under the radar, but is also
Mhm.
super important just for your blood and blood health. So,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
I
sure.
would I would say this has been really productive. We only have about a minute left, so
Yeah.
um, I'm super glad we got to do this. But Olivia, if you want to give give yourself a shout out before we wrap, just to kind of let people know where they can find you and learn more about your practice.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Thank you for that. Yeah, so I would love to stay in touch with your readers, obviously, or if anybody has like if anything I've had to say throughout this conversation really feels resonant for anybody, I would recommend connecting with me on Instagram. It's just at Olivia Hensel. Um, Also email, oliviakhensel@gmail.com, or you could find me on my website, oliviahensel.com. I'll have Fran post all of that in the actual newsletter. But yeah, send me a text, send me an email. I have all my contact information on my website, and would love to speak to some people if again what I've had to say feels resonant.
So, thanks so much, Olivia. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, I would love that.
Awesome. Thanks
All
so
right.
much. Catch you later.
See ya. Bye.